If you are into movies and movie-related discussions, you've come to the right place. Who am I, you ask? I am The Wiz, and I'm here today with...
Zero.
Happy 4th, Zero?
Yep.
Yeah, all right. Zero, we're here today to review the 1989 war film Glory, starring Matthew Broderick, Cary Elwes, Denzel Washington, and Morgan Freeman, directed by Edward Zwick. I think when we chose this one, you haven't heard of this movie before, correct?
Yeah, we were doing our usual thing of just trying to pick something patriotic for the 4th of July season, and just we were trying to go through stuff, and then it was just like, hey, so Amazon Prime has these following. I was like, let's just take a random shot at this and see if it works out. I was just like, historical war drama films, I don't really much mind, but when it gets into like the Civil War territory, I'm just like, I don't really know too much on the Civil War. I just know the basics, so it was just like, this is probably going to be a perfectly serviceable film.
Yeah. And most of the war films, when it comes to Civil War, with a few exceptions, are pretty dry as well. So, especially before the 90s. And the way I'm talking about this film today is before Saving Private Ryan and after. And there's a distinct reason as to why that is, and we'll get into that. We chose Glory for this one. I was surprised. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, but the thing that caught my eye immediately upon watching the film was the distinct difference as to how the film has been made and how it was shot. Because I don't know if you remember the big deal about Saving Private Ryan when it came out, and it was mainly because of how it was shot and how gritty it was, how bloody it was, and how it proved to the studios that an audience can handle something that intense when it came to war films. Because war films in the past, we'll go all the way down to like Bridge on the River Kwai, Patton, stuff like that. They had to sanitize it a great deal in order for it to be palatable for an audience. And Saving Private Ryan was one of those movies that said, no, actually, they can handle being a lot more dark than that. And this movie just reminded me of before Saving Private Ryan, in a certain extent, because even though there is some bloody scenes in this movie, there's, and it's right in the beginning of the film too. The film really sanitizes war to a certain extent and treats it as like it used to in the past as well, as a God-given duty, as something to be proud of and to be proud of doing. Whereas in most films nowadays, it's hell. It's a harsh reality. It's something that when you think you want to be a hero, and then all of a sudden you're there. I'm like, oh my God, I am in hell. This is horrendous, and the trauma and everything like that. So I thought that was like the first thing that caught my eye immediately when I started watching the film, is how it was, well, in the lack of a better word, glorified.
Especially in the beginning, just you see Captain Robert Gould just sort of starting off with a letter about, I'm part of this glorious war and everything. We're hoping to reunite the country and all this stuff. And just, it's got an air of, just romantic glory to it. And then it immediately jumps into the first scene where his superior officer just gets his head blown clean off. And he takes a grazing wound right to his neck, too. And it's just like, shit, maybe war isn't as glorious as it seems to be.
Right. And what's interesting about the movie is that they spend zero time with Shaw going, man, maybe I don't want this. He just immediately goes right back into it. Like it's like, I just saw my commanding officer get blown off like a bullet from a watermelon, but okay, let's do it again. I'm like, whoa, what? It's like, wait a minute. Like, there's the scene in the beginning of the movie where he's in he's in I guess it's a medic's tent or a medical tent?
Yeah, a field hospital, yeah.
Thank you, field hospital. And he's hearing people getting their legs chopped off and all the gore around him and everything, and here he is just getting a little bit of a bullet out of his neck. And you could have had something emotionally palpable there that could carry the entire film, but they just forget about it right after. And I'm like, huh. that's kind of a thing that they could have done more with, but they just decided not to, which was kind of disappointing. I think that's going to be one of my bigger problems with this film, is that there are deeper topics that they can go through in this movie, and they just don't. They just go through, I think, the same paces that you would with any other war film around that time. And this is more of a criticism of war films of that time period, but still, this is a story that I think deserved, a much deeper dive emotionally when it came to what was going on in this movie. This film is about the 54th All African American Regiment, the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry. Shaw, who is played by Matthew Broderick, basically is commanding these African-American volunteers into an army regiment. It goes from him doing basic training with these men to the end of the line with their regiment, and we won't get into that right away. I think the one thing I had a problem with in this film is that the main character always was Shaw in this. It was always Matthew Broderick's character. And part of the problem is I don't like Matthew Broderick in the role, and the other is I thought the story would have been much more interesting if it was more one of the black soldiers. And I was distinctly thinking about Andre Braugher's character, who played, or I think they call him Thomas, but they don't give him a rank in the film.
Initially starts off as a private, and I think he ends up later ranking up as a corporal or something.
Yeah.
I forget.
That character would have had a very interesting arc to deal with, going from being a freed man and being very bright-eyed and very idealistic, to then going through basic training, going through the harshness of it and what he goes through, to then being a soldier. And that would have been a very interesting arc, and to deal with all the more interesting characters within the soldiers and everything. Instead, they kept the film about Shaw, which I thought, again, this is something that happened at the time, and it was more common than it was back then, but I think that was an issue that I had, that because Shaw as a character is still kind of one note. It's not like I don't like the character of Shaw, it's just that I feel that there was more depth into the other characters. Even if you were to do what was Cary Elwes' character, Major Cadet? I forgot his name.
Major Cabot Forbes.
Thank you, Major Cabot Forbes. He was a more interesting character than I would say Shaw in this. But I just felt like were to concentrate on what character, I thought Shaw was the wrong move.
I definitely agree that it would have been interesting to focus on maybe some of the more significant members of the unit and everything. For me, I think if the focus was put onto Morgan Freeman's character, Sergeant Major John Rawlins, that could have made for something interesting, especially since Sergeant Major Rawlins sort of ends up being the bridge between the unit and Shaw, and just sort of ends up helping to communicate the unit's dissatisfaction and concerns properly.
We're going on a different avenues to where we think we can improve the movie. That's interesting. No, that's interesting. I agree to a certain extent. That might not have been a bad move, but I honestly, I pick Thomas because I think the performance from Braugher is a lot better than any of the other soldiers in the movie, including Denzel Washington, which we will get to. No, Morgan Freeman's character is not a bad idea in that, actually. It might be actually a better idea, now that you come to think of it. Why don't we just get right to performances? I've already mentioned, I think Broderick was wrong for the role. I initially thought first that, oh man, he's too baby-faced to actually do this role. And then my dumbass decided to oh, you know what? Let me look up the actual character. And then I'm like, oh, well, he was 26 and oh, that's what happens? Oh, shit. It's oh.
Yeah.
I just spoiled the entire movie for me. Excellent. Age-wise, he fit, but the performance I don't think was that good. It wasn't bad, but I would have preferred someone else in this role. I did like Cary Elwes, even though he got cut massively during the middle of the film. You don't see him at all within the middle and the end of the film, really. And I've already said Andre Braugher is actually a very good performance. Freeman's fine, and I thought, okay, I like Denzel Washington in this film, but I like him as an actor who is more thoughtful and much more of a deeper character than someone who is showy and bombastic, and I guess in this character sense, he's kind of a braggart in a certain sense. He does
definitely that.
He does do a good performance in this, but I find myself liking Braugher a lot more. I think that his performance is much better, but since Denzel's is much more showier, it gets more of I guess more of the acclaim in this. And I can already tell the scene that he did that got him the Oscar for this movie, but
Pretty much just agreed with you on the most part. I kind of liked Morgan Freeman's performance in this as Sergeant Major John Rollins, because he comes off as almost kind of stoic, in a sense, even though the unit is sort of thought of poorly for most of the movie, unfortunately. But that was sort of the reality of the actual tale of this unit. They're pretty much frowned upon by a lot of the other all-white units and everything. As far as Denzel Washington's performance as Private Silas Tripp, that started off interesting because I initially hated Private Silas Tripp. I was like, God, what an ass! Once you sort of see his motivations and everything come out, especially just towards the end of the movie, then you kind of understand like where he's coming from and just why he's the way he is. But he does evolve and grow towards the end as well too. And then of course, much like you mentioned, Andre Braugher as Corporal Thomas Searles was another good one, because just starts off as like just this bright-eyed idealistic person who's just like, oh yeah, this war is just something that we got to go through for the betterment of this nation and everything. And thinking it's just going to be kind of like the romanticized books and stuff that he's read as a black free man. But going through the basic training and stuff like that, it's nowhere near the idealistic and romanticized image of all the books that he's read.
Yeah.
And he just sort of grows from that.
I would say his growth in the film as it's constructed seemed a little, I guess off is probably the best way I can do it, because there wasn't that realization of him toughening up at a certain point. It just went from him getting his ass kicked by the commanding officer to then suddenly he's fine. And I would have liked that bridge between where he realized he had to toughen up to where he becomes a soldier that he is in this. I think that they kind of grazed over that a little bit. And I think that's mainly because the film decided to make the main characters the main character Colonel Shaw in this, which again, I'm gonna keep saying I think is the fatal flaw of this film, because I just think that if you are making this film about an all-black regiment, you would think that the ones that would have the most emotional resonance and go through the most emotional problems and have all the drama in it are those soldiers. But they concentrate more on Shaw and the fact that he is turned into a sort of kind of pariah amongst the officers, which I'm like, I don't care. He barely is in this movie. He just gets to deal with a quartermaster who's kind of a dick and another commanding officer who does something terrible, and that's about it. That's all the drama on his end. The rest of it is, I am proud to do this regiment and to get these guys into fine soldiers. I'm like, and it's like, okay, great. I don't care. It's like, this could have been a very good supporting performance. I understand why they made that decision, because at the time, all they cared about was how we're going to get the most money and since more white people actually go see movies in the theaters, we want to make sure that they can identify with the main character, thus Shaw is the main character. Where I think it would probably have been better if it was an ensemble piece with Tripp and Braugher's character and Freeman's character as the main characters. I think that would have been a better movie in that end, but I'll digress from there. The action scenes in this film, I gotta say, I definitely appreciated how the action scenes were done, and for one main reason, and it's the fact that none of the film had CGI, which, which I know back then, of course not, but seeing war films after Saving Private Ryan, you don't realize how much CG and how much just computer-generated graphics and green screens are in these films. Like in this one, they're set on location with tons of extras, and it looks good. It looks really good. That said, the action, while good and still feels authentic, kind of feels choppy in certain extents. There was one scene in the middle of the movie where the regiment starts to go into battles and everything. I don't like how the action was blocked in that scene. It just seemed kind of all over the place to a certain extent. But it was, in the end, it was fine. I think the beginning scene at Antietam and the end scene at Fort Wagner, I think, were actually very good in that.
Kind of to piggyback on your mention about the war scenes, with the fact that they weren't done with CGI because back in the 80s, CGI was just prohibitively expensive. It was kind of interesting to see a movie with a lot of practical effects. I was like, oh my god, there's no CGI. There's no having to kind of look for where there's sloppy blending and stuff going on. Because, I mean, that's just something that you're just so used to from modern day movies, where you're just like, all right, you're probably going to have a lot of CGI because, you know, just as some of these productions are like, yeah, we're too cheap to travel to the location, so we're just gonna green screen it and, you know, just use some props to make it look like, you know, we're actually at the place. It'll be fine. And seeing them like in Antietam and just doing the war scene stuff, and then being on the actual beach where Fort Wagner was, it was just like, wow, holy shit! Just I forgot just what the fact that, you know, practical effects had to be a thing in the 80s, so it was kind of refreshing to see.
Yeah,
I do agree with you that there were some moments in some of the action scenes where just things just didn't quite seem to look right, but I mean, in my opinion, it felt sort of few and far between. It was just like, okay, that looks a little off, but whatever. So that was kind of my thought on it. I think really just some of the frictional moments, be it within the unit or with the unit interacting with other units, was sort of interesting to see, because the way that the shots were framed, it sort of kind of gave you like a sense of tension. Just there was a lot of clutter, and just visually things looked a little bit jumbled up, and you're just like, oh man, something serious is about to happen. And arguments would just seem like they would sort of build up to a powder keg. And I think to the cinematography, and the cinematography is pretty good.
Yes, the cinematography won the Oscar that year for this, and it is very good. I think the way that the film, the action scenes are shot when the shooting happens is actually really good. I think the action when it goes to hand-to-hand or close combat is messy. It doesn't feel like there's a landing on any of this, on any of these fight scenes. Some will say, well, that's kind of the style of the time. You know, insert Simpsons meme here. It still lessens the impact of those action scenes when it comes to that. But I agree that the cinematography on those sequences are actually really good in that scene. We're going to get the spoilers for Glory, the 1989 film starring Matthew Broderick, Morgan Freeman, Denzel Washington, and Andre Braugher, directed by Edward Zwick. If you have not seen it, you can stop here and come back when you're ready. We'll get into spoilers in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There's two things I want to talk about in spoiler. The first thing I want to talk about is Private Trip and when he goes AWOL. This scene is probably the scene that got Denzel Washington his Oscar, and the reason why I'm saying that is because of the look on his face as he's getting whipped. And I think you know the one look I'm talking about, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. And before that scene, I was watching this film going, how did he win the Oscar for this? It's not a bad performance. It really isn't. But then I'm watching it going, he's just arrogant. Okay, sure. It's like, okay. And then when that scene pops up, I'm like, oh, okay. It's like, I get it now. Yeah, the scene where he is getting whipped, he plays it perfectly, because he really is playing the character like he's in pain, but he's toughing it out while looking at the commanding officer. And then the tear that drops in his eye is like, oh my God, that's actually really good.
Yeah.
I was like, shit. It's like that scene right there is like, okay, I get it now. That's how he won. And after that, his performance is good. But I think, and here's another problem I have with the film. It seems like all the key scenes that we would have needed for the black soldiers in this scene were cut. The evolution of Braugher's character from being very bright-eyed and innocent to then being a soldier is just washed over. Trip going from being beaten and going through what happened to then being okay with the unit and being almost a leader, washed over. Morgan Freeman's character going from kind of somebody who's like, I guess, who takes it seriously to then being a leader, washed over completely. And I just think it lessens the impact of the film itself. Even though I am going to end up liking the film, I just think there was a better film inside of this that they just decided to not go through, or they made Shaw the main character of the film. Because let's be honest here. I mean, yeah, I bet Shaw had to go through some things as well, but it's nowhere near as interesting and as compelling as what I would say the soldiers went through in this.
And it's kind of funny that you mentioned the scene where Private Trip ends up being whipped and struck for desertion and everything, because I was watching it on Amazon Prime, and of course with Amazon it's got the little like factoid x-ray thing, and I remember I had to hit pause because I was like, shit, I gotta take a bathroom break real quick. And then the x-ray fact popped up on that. It was just like anachronism. Shaw's unit actually did away with the practice of whipping and beating soldiers for desertion. So this actually would have never happened historically. I was just like, oof.
So, all right. I mean, films do that. Films do that. It adds to the drama of the story. So I guess if you're looking for this film as just a historical piece, yeah, that would kind of piss you off. But again, I kind of get why they went that route, even though now that you mentioned it and come to think of it, is kind of weird how this guy was friends with black people, who was considered a very good ally to them at the time, and then he decides to do the one thing that he knows happens that dehumanizes them, but he decides to do it anyway in front of the regiment. It was like, that's not great.
Yeah, so it was kind of one of those funny things. I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. I mean, yeah, and I'm kind of with you that I get it. The reason that the scene was probably there is just to kind of amp up the drama and everything like that. But yeah, it was just kind of funny seeing like the occasional X-ray facts pop up, like when I had to stop the movie because like I had my family talking to me or something. I'd just be like, huh, what? And then I'd come back to the screen and be like, X-ray, Amazon X-ray facts, and it'd be like here's a factoid blurb about this. This was historically accurate or whatever. It was like, oh well, interesting.
Yeah, I generally, when I'm on Amazon Prime, I try to avoid all those factoids just to. Because did it color your feelings of the film when you saw that factoid? Go, oh, did that happen with you at all?
No, I actually just kind of thought that they were sort of like interesting things to sort of just add additional color to the movie. It was just like, oh, well, that's neat.
Yeah, sometimes I've come across where I would watch a film and something happens, go, oh, that's fascinating. And I do what you do. I pause, and I have to go to the bathroom, or I take a drink of something and I accidentally move my mouse, and goes, oh, by the way, this would never happen because. I'm like, oh, fuck. That sucks. Well, that ruins everything. Okay, well, that's interesting. Let's go through another scene, too. Let's go to the scene where the regiment burns down that city. That's another scene that I think would have been very interesting. The main characters were the soldiers. Because in that scene, we get to see, how conflicted Shaw is about doing this. About the soldiers! In that, like, when they're supposed to be, like, these upstanding people and they're trying to do the right thing and to fight for their freedom, and here they are just burning down houses for some stupid reason. And the other odd thing about the scene, too, is that the soldiers seem to not have any reservations about it. And now, some would say, well, they're soldiers and they're not supposed to. Which, okay, sure. But then there should be some kind of emotional intangibility in that scene where it shows the soldiers being at least conflicted while still doing their duty in this. But they wash over that completely in that scene. To me, I would think these soldiers would be like, are we really supposed to be doing this? And the other thing that I found kind of weird, too, is how the film says, here are the bad black people and here are the good black people. And I think it's more along the lines of what they're trying to do is that the commanding officer didn't train these soldiers the right way, and Shaw did. Therefore, Shaw is the good guy, whereas this commanding officer is the bad guy. Whereas I'm just sitting here going, I don't give a shit. I want to know what these soldiers are feeling. And they don't go anywhere near that at all. They just go, wow, Shaw's really conflicted. I'm like, I don't give a shit. It's like, who cares? What about the soldiers in this one?
Yeah, it was a little sad because, like, leading up to that, just you start off with kind of the unit being sort of like just a jumbled mess, just guys sort of just dicking around all day because just the racist quartermaster keeps denying them supplies. And Shaw is like literally just trying to struggle and say, hey, I don't want to fucking sit on my hands. I want to do what's right for my nation and start helping the fight to reunify the North and the South. And just, you see a lot of that struggle in the beginning, and then it's finally just Shaw just gets pissed off and starts like fucking with the quartermaster, going, oh, you gonna fuck with me? Well, sure, I'm gonna fuck with you. And starts like raiding around and stuff. And then you see things kind of take a positive turn where just they finally get boots, they finally get uniforms, they finally get socks, they finally get rifles. Things are going good. And then this scene sort of kicks off with like Shaw being told, oh yeah, you know, you'll be joining this other unit. They've also got some black soldiers as well too. And then it's just like, oh hey, by the way, our unit, all they do is fuck around and screw around. So yeah, just you need to have your dudes do the same thing my dudes are doing. And you see the initial conflict of Shaw going, oh, God, just this is fucked up. And then of course, just at the same time, this guy's like kind of dangling it over his head, going, if you don't do this, then I will court-martial the shit out of you and I will take over your unit. So, you know, you don't want to lose your unit, then you're going to do as I damn well tell you to. And then, of course, he sort of caves, and it's just like, I know it's a movie. I know there's probably much more struggle in the historic version of this, but there could have been a little bit more push and pull on this.
Yeah.
But yeah, just, it was one of those things I was like, damn it, there could have been more drama to this. There could have been more push and pull. There could have just been a little bit more elaboration on this, because likely Shaw's unit probably didn't feel good about this historically. They probably were just like, wow, that's fucked up. Right. So, but yeah, it just seemed like they kind of glossed over, and it was like, yeah, you know, eventually Shaw's unit just does the same thing anyway, so let's move on. This is like, there's probably much more drama to this, and you probably did a huge disservice by just kind of curtailing this to be as short as possible.
Yeah. And again, like, we hear nothing about how the soldiers feel about this, which I think would be the more important people to know about how they feel about what they're doing. And we hear a little bit about how they don't like the fact they're doing manual labor, because that's what essentially that this unit was used at the time, until Shaw actually really put his foot on someone's neck and actually got what he wanted. But then the quartermaster scene, that scene, and then the scene with his superior officer demanding to get into combat really highlighted how I thought Broderick was not right for this role. Because at no point did I really feel like he was intimidating enough to actually pull off those scenes. He still seemed, and this is just Broderick, I think, he has this whiny kind of voice that when he's acts angry, he kind of sounds childish. Whereas I think in a much more, I don't know who I would choose in this role, but I think there were other actors who could have been a little more intimidating, a little more crazy, a little more like angry, and could really make you feel that. And I just don't think Broderick was right for those specific scenes, which made him getting his way seem a little unbelievable. I know that's what happened in the record, of course, but seeing Broderick in that role performing that just did not fit with me, like, at all in that. I throughout the entire film, I thought that Shaw was wrongly cast in this. I think there should have been someone better on that role. But again, at that time, I don't know who you would have chosen. Last scene, okay, so the Fort Wagner scene. Really good scene. I thought the action, the build-up to it was really good. Although I felt that the scene that they had with them walking to Wagner and the previous regiment that were calling them racist epithets and calling them all sorts of names in the middle of the movie, all of a sudden we're cheering them on as they were about to go on their suicide mission. Spoilers, they all die. I thought that was kind of hokey. I was like, really? But like, that again, that's kind of the style at the time, because they want people to in these types of movies they still wanted people to go in going, oh, but this is a happy ending. Oh, they respect them now, which I sincerely doubt that's what happened at that time. It just rang kind of false with me that suddenly the people that were calling them the N-word and saying all sorts of racist caricatures are all of a sudden going, yeah, give them hell, 54th. I'm like, yeah, okay, that really happened. Sure. Okay.
It was just kind of interesting with the lead up to that scene because, of course, just you've got one of the high commanders basically just kind of laying out the mission, saying, "Hey, there is this narrow strip of beach. This is the only way to get into Fort Wagner. Who's going to go do this?" And you just see every other unit sort of shirking off the duty, going, "Fuck that! That's a suicide mission. Fuck that! I ain't doing it." And then just Shaw just kind of comes out of the woodwork going, "Our unit will go. My men are brave and ready to do this. It's just part of the duty to get done." And of course, just that's when you see like all the other units going, "Oh my god, seriously? He's gonna do it? He must be fucking crazy," and everything. And then of course you see Shaw's unit sort of kind of celebrating, but also reciting prayers and everything because they likely are aware that this is a suicide mission. So they're trying to, for lack of a better way of putting it, make good with God. So they're all sort of like offering their prayers, saying, you know, I'm thankful to God. I'm thankful for my duty and everything like that. It's kind of a somber yet celebratory moment. And then this is where Trip sort of opens up, and it's kind of a watershed moment because, I mean, for most of the movie, Trip's kind of cocky. He's a bit of a shithead. It's at this moment he really opens up, and he's just kind of has a bit of an emotional moment, and they finally sort of come together as a unit in a much more stronger bond. And then you get to the actual scene, and it is just grim. Just you've got soldiers being shot by cannons and rifle fire, and it just looks absolutely brutal. And then right when Shaw's just about to lead the charge, he takes one hell of a shot to the chest, and he just goes down. And of course you see his unit sort of looking panicked, like, oh my god, the one guy who trusted us, who pretty much got us to where we are, and he's down. Oh my god, what the hell do we do? And then this is sort of when Trip sort of kind of gathers the courage in him, and then that's when he begins hoisting the flag and just letting the colors unfurl out and just trying to push the unit to go forward. And then just you see the unit just doing their damnedest to try to survive this just terrible suicide mission. It's just an absolute brutal scene, and it is in no way glorious.
Yeah, I mean, the action in this scene is pretty good. It's actually very good, except for, again, the hand-to-hand or close combat scenes. They just are. It just seems like they're hitting air, and it's kind of like bad professional wrestling, where like they swing and then all of a sudden, ah! And I'm like, okay, like that's great. The emotional resonance of the scene is very good in that movie, in that scene. When Shaw gets shot down, of course, I spoiled it for myself looking it up, but it was actually an effective scene in this. And then with Trip going forward was actually really good too. The closing of that scene, which is where the guys get over the hill, and then boom, there's like a bunch of guns pointing right at them, and obviously they're dead after that, was surprisingly powerful in that scene. I thought it would have been a lot more powerful if we saw more of Cary Elwes' character in the scene, in the movie. We saw him a lot in the beginning, but he kind of went into the background like throughout the rest of the film. Like I don't think I barely saw him in the film. Did you? He
was definitely very prominent in the beginning, especially when he's sort of trying to be sort of Shaw's counterweight and everything. And then pretty much just after the 54th sort of get the recognition, he sort of vanishes, and that's it. Yeah. Apparently his role was cut significantly in this film. I read about that a little bit. But the closing scene is something that I think highlights my biggest problem with this movie. So at the end of the movie, what happens is you see the dead bodies of that battle,
and you see the Confederate soldiers digging a mass grave. This is what happens, was what happened with a lot of soldiers in the Civil War, especially black soldiers. Is what they did was the Confederates dug a mass grave, took the bodies, threw them all in, digged them back into the ground, and that was it. And the final scene is them throwing Shaw into the mass grave, which at the time was considered a huge insult. You don't do that to an officer. You don't do. The officer gets his body sent back to his family, and it's the soldiers who get dug in the mass grave. But because they detested Shaw so much that they threw him in with the black soldiers. That being the end was like, why? I think if the end of the movie was them digging the mass grave, and then you see credits, and then you see him dig the hole back up, and then saying, oh, job's done, I think would have been a much more powerful statement as to the hatred of the South at the time, than to be like, oh no, and Shaw's in there too? Oh no. Because then what's the final thing in the scene, in the movie, which I think highlights the big problem I have with it, is they concentrate on Shaw's body, and they zoom in, and then all of a sudden you see Trip, you see Denzel Washington's character just get in the frame slightly, and then credits. And I'm like, wait, what? I was like, wait a minute. It's like, oh yeah, and here's Trip too. Bye. I'm like, what? It's like, wait a minute. Like, that's a little strange. But
yeah, it was a bit abrupt.
Yeah. So yeah, I just felt like again, I think this is all going to highlight where I think the big problem I had with the film was that I think the main characters should have really been the soldiers, and then Shaw would have been like a very showy supporting performance. It should have been an ensemble movie about these soldiers, and Shaw and Cary Elwes' character should have been like supporting performances in this movie, I think. I don't think they should have been the main characters. And I think that scene really highlighted to me the errors in what they made the film to be on that one end. What did you think of that ending, though? It
was just really abrupt, and it was just like, wow. And then, of course, you've got kind of like the historical text of, Shaw's unit was just brave and valorly, and pretty much just the tale of his unit sort of inspired other black African Americans to kind of enlist and join up and everything. And then the mention that, Abraham Lincoln was actually thankful for these brave men who did choose to sign up, because he felt that they were a major reason that the North won the war and everything. It's just like, okay, well, that was nice for the, closing facts and stuff like that, but wow, you really just kind of did a cut and run for the ending. It was just like, all right, yeah, so unit's dead, boom, mass grave. Okay, we're done, bye.
Yeah, I think that ending would have worked, because it's exactly what happened. They got shot, they pretty much got shot to death, and there could have been, I think, more to that scene than that, but I get the abruptness of it. I just don't like what they concentrated on, which was Shaw. I think it should have been like, oh, they just were digging a mass grave, and that would have been a very powerful image right there, where the bodies were so disrespected that they just dug a mass grave, and that was it. Done. It was over. I think that would have been the best way to end that scene, and not concentrate on Shaw so much. It is my, I didn't mind the abruptness, but I think the concentration of which character to rely on was, I think, the weird part of it. Final thoughts on Glory. I went into this film surprised that I reacted so well to the old school style of how they did war films around the time. I liked the fact that they dealt with extras and it was more location based. I definitely enjoyed that aspect of it. I had an issue with the concentration of where the movie was going through. Like, I don't like the fact that Shaw was the main character. I thought that was an issue with that. Although I understand how films were made back then, why that was, I still think that the soldiers probably would have been the better characters to go with in this. Despite that, I did like the movie. I didn't like it. I'm going to get the feeling I didn't like it as much as you, Zero, but I did enjoy the film and thought it was good for what it was. I'm going to give it 3 out of 5. If this movie were to be remade into a series, I think that would actually be a very good idea. That being said, if you're going to watch the movie as it is right now, it's good, but I think that there should have been a different set of characters when it came to who were the main characters in this movie. So 3 stars for me for Glory.
I'm probably going to be a little bit more generous. Probably set this one at a 75. The war scenes definitely had a little bit more impact than some modern day war scenes and stuff like that, especially just from the fact that just it's all practical effects. There was no CGI or green screen technology and stuff like that. So it was very good there. It was interesting seeing the growth of the unit from being just a bunch of ragtag misfits that were dismissed by some very racist folks and everything, and then seeing them just sort of grow into just being this dedicated fighting unit who proud to have volunteered to do this and everything. Then you have that one scene in the middle of them sort of sacking and just destroying this one little town and everything that I felt could have had a little bit more drama, but didn't, especially with Shaw's sort of lack of protesting and everything. It was just kind of a, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this. And then, okay, well, if I might lose my unit, fuck, okay, I guess my guys will have to do it anyways. You have scenes like that which could have used much more drama and much more human interest, and it just sort of glosses over that. It's like, okay, well, this was the thing that happened. It's just like, guys, you had a great opportunity to do something here. And then, of course, the ending would have been a little bit impactful, but yeah, that would, overall, I came out pleasantly surprised because, again, as I mentioned in the start of this podcast, I don't mind war movies, but the Civil War is not really something that I have, like, fanatic knowledge on, so I was just like, alright, it's probably going to be a fine movie, but this movie had some great impact to it, so that's why I'm choosing to go with a 75%.
Okay, not bad. So 75% for you and 3 stars for me on Glory. Good movie. If you haven't checked it out, I think you should. It's on Tubi, and I think it's on Amazon Prime. A definite throwback, I would say, to what war films used to be. So very patriotic, too. A lot of patriotic music as well, something I should point out. But, yep, 3 stars for me, 75% for 0 on that.